I'm gonna talk about what it's like being black in Berlin. I can tell you my experience. And I also wanna say that being black in Berlin is very different from being black anywhere else in Germany. The main thing you need to know about this video is that I love living in Berlin so much. I knew that this is where I was supposed to be. Before I had even moved here, it felt like this is where I should be. And then when I got here, it never changed. People I know in the US will ask me, so how much longer are you planning on living in Berlin? And usually my answer is, I don't have any plans to leave. But lately, if anyone in the US has the nerve to ask me how much longer I plan on living in Berlin, my question is, how much longer do you plan on living in the US? No, seriously, I really wish that my friends and family that lived in the US could be here instead. I'm really grateful to be here. I plan to be here for a long time. I should probably give some context about where I lived before I moved here. I moved to Berlin from St. Louis, Missouri, which is in the middle of the United States. If you know where Chicago is, it's about 4.5 hours drive from Chicago. The population of St. Louis is about, in the city, it's 300,000 people about, and Berlin's population is about 3 million. I moved from St. Louis to a city that's 10 times the size of that, and that's exactly what I wanted. Now that I'm here, I feel so much safer. I feel physically safer here. The police here don't feel like as much of a threat. I'm not saying that police here are not a threat. I'm not saying that I love the police here. I'm just saying that by contrast, coming from the US, everything really feels like a weight off my chest. And even like I've had experiences with police here, it's so different. My first encounter was shortly after I moved here, and I was just outside, and then there was someone handing out pamphlets, and a police officer comes up and is like, hey, you can't do that. And it wasn't even me handing out pamphlets, right? So I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was standing there talking to someone. If this were in the US and a police officer came up, I'd be like, I gotta go. Now's my time. And and I, even if I'm not doing anything wrong. Here it was like, okay, the police officer was like, you can't do that. And the person's like, oh, why not? The police officer was like, oh, I don't know. Like, once you realize you're not gonna get arrested, you're not gonna get shot, you kind of like tune out on whatever else is being said. So all I got from that encounter was that a cop came up to me and another person and was like, hey, don't do that, and then walked away. Like, what? The last thing I'll say about feeling physically safe is that because I live in a city now where there are more people, there are also more witnesses. Were something to happen, there are people walking on the street, there are people in the train, and just by nature of the way that the city is set up compared to how cities are set up in the US, there are people walking around because if there's the grocery store is next to the house, the grocery store is next to the doctor, the apartment building is next to the workplace. And so there's always people moving in and out as opposed to like a suburb. The neighborhoods have things that people would need to get to every day, so they're going in and out of there. And that just means there are more people around, and if something were to happen, you could call for help. Would people actually do anything if I were to call for help? I'm not sure yet. I have an experience that would make me think, we don't know. But I just, in general, I like to think that people would. Another thing I've noticed about being black in Berlin is that white people still get mad when I take up space. I have many examples of when this has happened, and every time it is so upsetting. It's especially upsetting because the language barrier, right? So I speak some German and I understand it a lot better than I can speak it. So what will happen is I understand that someone is being racist and they're upset that I'm in their space. And I'm processing not only, that whenever this happens, it brings up all this other like racial trauma. And I'm trying to deal with that. I'm trying to deal with the present moment. And then I'm trying to communicate and advocate for myself in German, and it's usually hard to get that across. I just wish I could clap back auf Deutsch, Like, clap back auf Deutsch is my goal. And I don't think I'm getting anywhere with Duolingo. It's not getting me to that level where I want to be able to advocate for Black lives. Duolingo doesn't teach that. All right. I had a recent experience. I was at the German equivalent of a dollar store, the Euro shop, and I was about to leave. I entered the aisle and I see a white woman entering the aisle while I'm already in it. And this is a very narrow aisle, and I see that if she's gonna keep coming towards me, we're not both going to be able to pass. Something like it's a very narrow aisle, and it's going to be awkward to get around each other. However, because I was already making my way down the aisle, I thought I know what's going to happen here, but I'm going to do it because I'm asserting my physical space as a Black person. So I keep walking, and we meet in the middle, and she stops, and she says something that I don't understand, but I did know that she's really upset, and I'm already like kind of blanking out because she's starting to yell at me, and then I don't move. And I know that's what she wanted me to do, and I'm not going to. Why would I do that? Why? And then what I do understand is when she tells me to move backwards. I think the first time she's just, like shouting, but then she actually tells me to move my body all the way back out of the aisle so that she can go past. Again, I don't have the words to say what I want to say, but I do know what to do, which is not move. I stay there, and in my head I'm trying to think about all these things I want to say, and what comes out is Entschuldigung. And so I really just, I say sorry. Entschuldigung is like, excuse me. So I'm telling her, excuse me, I'm not going to move, but I do need to get past you. And I just do a little hand movement. The look on her face, she does move. And so we kind of go and we get past each other. And then as I am getting past her, I realize that she wasn't wearing a mask. Now, I don't know how it is where you are, but in Berlin, it's still required to wear a mask while you're shopping. So I was like, okay, I just came face to face with a white woman who is not wearing a mask in a store. So I already know this person she's not okay. And I tried to use that to comfort me that whatever else she did was already, it's understandable because this is the kind of person who was probably at the demo a few weeks ago that was 17,000 people saying, we don't want to wear masks. So I was like, it's that kind of person. I can just brush off what happened. But this is it's not a unique experience. This has happened to me other times. It's happened to me at the airport. It's happened to me on the sidewalk trying to cross the street. People will get mad that in their space, they will tell me to move. And that's, I think, what is so unique about it. Or maybe it's not unique. In the US, the racism is a bit different. So here they will actually tell me to get out of the way. And I know this happens to people in the US, but the fact that it's happening here, I just want to say that it's still a thing. The only difference is I can't even respond. I can't make the comeback that I want to say in German, because if I did, that is my language goal. Another thing about living in Berlin as a Black person is that people are actually nice. You'll hear about this thing, Berliner Schnauze, which basically is the concept that people who live in Berlin are so cold, and so they'll turn their nose up at you and they'll just respond snarkily to anything that you say. This is in some ways true, but it's also not as prevalent as people, especially people on Reddit, would want you to think. When I moved here, I had people that were surprisingly nice, and it was only surprised because I was told otherwise. But I had people who were nice to me so often that I was just I feel like I've been lied to. It's just random interactions with strangers. Maybe you're in your apartment and you're walking down the stairs. Oh, this is something that's actually really nice. People say hi. German people especially, not so much foreigners who've moved here, but if you're German and you pass someone in your apartment, apparently it's just the rule that you say hello. And so it's, it doesn't even matter that I'm Black, people will still say hello. And so that's been a nice thing for me. There was a point when I lived in a building that was mostly foreigners, and then people didn't say hi, and I noticed that. So there are nice interactions to be had. It's not like Berlin is just a cold place to be. It's not. Another thing that you'll pay attention to if you're black and living in Berlin is that when you're applying for jobs, when you're applying for apartments, you need to include a photo. Everyone has to do this. I don't know why. I thought, isn't that illegal? I don't know. But you look up how to make a German style resume, then it involves a photo. And when you're applying for an apartment, they want you to include a passport photo. So if you're black, what this means is that people will know that you're black before they've even seen you, before you've gotten to the job interview, before you've gotten to the door of the apartment that you're trying to see. And you can kind of extrapolate how that affects the job application process, the flat hunt process. It's always this thing where it's like, was this so difficult because I'm black, or was it something else? And then you kind of have a feeling that being black has something to do with it, but of course you can never like pinpoint and say that. And then you have people who like gaslight you and be like, oh, like, why do you always have to make everything about race? Like, what if it's just not? And then, like, there are stories online of people changing their name, changing the photo, having their white German spouse go like apply on their behalf instead, and suddenly everything gets so much easier. So that's all I'll say about that. In my experience, racism and anti-blackness, when it is blatant, it's pretty blatant. Like, they will specifically mention race, right? So then there are microaggressions where you're like, is this happening because I'm black? Probably, but they won't come out and say it, and they probably don't even understand that that's what they're doing, so that when you call them out on it, they're like, no, it's not that. But there are actually times when they will tell you it's about race. There was the time when I was on the train. This was right when I moved to Berlin. So my German was not good enough to understand what was going on, but I did understand the word Afrikan, and like, I don't know what else he said, but there was this dude who was so in my face, just yelling at me for, I don't know, like 10 minutes. And the thing is, he followed me onto the train and he followed me off the train. And during that entire ride, no one said anything. Like, there was one person who was like, hey man, like, but they didn't step in. And then there was one point where like a white German woman sat down and talked to me and was saying, it's not really like this. We don't do this in Germany. Like, ignore this guy. I'm like, but why isn't anyone talking to the actual guy and telling him to stop, spewing anti-blackness at me? So that happened. There was also the time when I got what I can only call Nazi propaganda. It's the flyers from AfD, which is a political party in Germany, and I got flyers in my mailbox that were so racist. The whole story, I did a write-up about this, so I'll just put a link in the description and you can read the story because it's a lot and I won't get into it here. But again, they will tell you that it's about race. What else can I talk to you about being black in Berlin? I promise, like, it's not all bad. It's actually, again, compared to the US, it's really quite nice. It's just, the point is that no matter where I go, it still happens. For example, people will say that in Germany we don't have the same problem in the US, like anti-blackness and racism. That's a US problem. We don't have that here. I'm like, okay, really? Then why do I still feel the burdens of anti-blackness? Am I just like, no, like, just because you don't see it, just because you don't know how to recognize it, name it, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And I can, if we were to really get into these stories, I could tell you all the times when racism does exist in Berlin, it does exist in Germany. And that's just from my perspective as a black person, not to mention anyone from any other race who is either born in Germany or comes to Germany, right? Because you also have, there are plenty of black people in Berlin or people of other races in Berlin who are not white, who were born and raised here and experience racism. And I can't speak to that, but it definitely happens. And just as anywhere I go, there will be racism for me to experience, there is also the black nod for me to experience. And I love this so much. Actually, that same day where I had this experience with the person yelling at me in the oil shop, I had 2 black nods that day. And it's something that just like, it's like this little thing that we like cling on to, but it means so much. Like, as soon as I see a black person, I am like, okay, I'm not gonna look now, but when they are close enough for me to look, I'm gonna look and I'm gonna nod them. And then they nod back, and it's so, like, it feels so nice. Another thing is that it's not just black people in Berlin. Like, you will notice different groups. There are black Americans, there are Afro-Deutsch, there are African immigrants, so people who moved here from Africa, and then there are people who are black and moved here from and immigrated here from somewhere else. But you'll notice that it's, when you're trying to relate to other black people, you might have a little bit more difficulty if they're not from the same, like, sphere, I guess. So if I'm not talking to someone who is a black American, it might be, I'll notice after a while, like, oh, like, I'm trying to relate to this person. I'm so excited to see another black person. However, we don't have a lot of the same experiences, so it just feels a bit different. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's cool to, also be able to be united just by being black, and then to share our own experiences and see how they're different. But it is something to notice. The last thing I want to talk about is the export of black American culture. It happens everywhere, right? The way that it happens in Germany, it's strange. In Berlin, there's not a very strong hip hop, R&B, rap scene. If you want to dance to hip hop, there are very few places where you can do that. But there's this one thing that I want to talk about, and it's the word Digga. So, there is this word that apparently was popularized in the 90s in Hamburg when rap and hip hop became, like, a big thing there. It's Dicke, which means, like, fat, or it's how you would describe someone who's fat. That's what it means. Even though it's spelled Dickeer, you can also see it spelled Digger or Digga. And the word is used the same way that we would use another word that looks very similar to Digga. It's a word that's used in the hip hop scene a lot, and it's used among teenagers as well. But it originated in the hip hop scene, which kind of tells you, if it sounds like what you think it sounds like, there's probably a reason. And the reason, I'm like, do you think you're slick? Like, you're really going around saying nigga but with a D? Just like, it's so strange that I don't know if people talk about this. Like, I don't really know that many people who were, like, born and raised in Germany, so I don't know, like, what the discourse is around this word. But it's so strange that people just say this and they're like, oh, no, but it means bro, it means dude. It's just similar to Alta, which is another word that means, like, bro or dude. It actually means old person. So that's the last thing. I thought it was interesting. In general, living in Berlin while being black feels a lot better than it did living in the US while being black. I love it here. I love living in Berlin, and somehow I think that's not related to race, right? It's just, there are a lot of things I like about Berlin that suit me, but somehow it also is related to race, because there are a lot of other places in the world that that suit me, that have things I like, but that I wouldn't feel comfortable there. Like when I lived in Japan, I really like a lot of things about living in Japan, but it was a lot more uncomfortable as a black person compared to living in Berlin as a black person. If you like this video, thanks a lot. Please let me know. You can let me know by subscribing or by liking or by leaving a comment, and I'll see you in the next video.